Welcome to Veteran Voice. My name is Larry McCullaugh. I'll be your host today. We thank you for tuning in. We think you're going to really enjoy the program we've got set up today. It's a unique show that we're doing for the first time. We've got a couple of World War II veterans, one who's been here as a guest in the past, and they have their lovely wives with them today. And we're going to find out what it was like for the people on the home front back during World War II. On my right, my guest who's been here before is Maurice Gibson and his lovely wife, Jean. Welcome both of you to the program.
Thank you.
Glad to have you back. You've been through this before, so I'm sure you'll enjoy this as much as you did last time. And on the other side is F.M. Speakman and his lovely wife, Bess. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is your first time, but I assure you, you're going to enjoy this. It's going to be an enjoyable experience. Maurice, let's go ahead and start in case somebody didn't catch the last time you were on. Let us know. Tell us about the branch of the service that you went into and when you went in.
1943, I went into service. I married previous to that, and went into the infantry and took my training in Camp Cross, South Carolina. Then I went overseas and joined up with the 91st Infantry Division. We went to Africa and just did some cleanup there. We wasn't really in battle, but even though I did get a star for it, but it was actually very little fighting done with our outfit. And then we came on back into Sicily, and we did see some combat there. Then we went on into Italy, and that's where we stayed for about 18 months. So I spent quite a bit of time in Italy, and then I got out of the service in February of 46. So I was in a part of 4 different years in service during that time.
Were you drafted and inducted that way?
Yes, I was drafted, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you have a choice of which branch, or
No, I didn't. I tried to go into the Air Force, and then I tried to get in the Marines, and oh, no, we need infantrymen. Said they're killing them all so fast. Said we need infantrymen. So they throwed me right in the infantry.
That was encouraging to hear.
Yeah, it was encouraging. You better believe it. But that's where all the guys went, 90% of them. And I had one guy behind me. He said, "I have nothing to worry about." I looked at him. He pulled his eye out. See, I looked at him. I said, "Is that all's wrong with you?" And he said, "That's it." Got up there, and Colonel that was examining us, he was right behind me, and I just waited a second to see what would happen. He pulled his eye out and showed the Colonel. He said, "Put that back in. You're in the Army."
They'll let you know what to do.
Right
Yeah.
quick.
Well, FM, tell us what branch of the military were you in, and how did you get in?
Well, I don't know just how much of the story you want. But I was in the regular Army. I volunteered. And when I volunteered, of course, I went in a little too young. But at the time, my life at home and with my mother and family was so upset. I was so upsetting to the family that I told my mother, I asked her, I said, "If I got into the Army, would you sign the papers for me?" And she said, "I sure would, because at least then I know where you are." I gave her quite a rough way to go. I was a wild teenager. But an old boy, a friend of mine, talked me into signing up, and I hitchhiked from my home to Nashville 5 different times to get in. So I was kind of desperate to get in, but I signed up, went into the regular Army, and I signed up for the Panama Canal. And that's where I went. And when I got there, they assigned me to the 11th Engineers, which at that time, without war or not being in war, we were called construction engineers. But after the war started, then of course we became combat engineers. But anyway, today, by the way, is my anniversary of signing up for the Army.
Well, congratulations.
April the 11th, 1940. I was sworn in the Atlanta courthouse. And then from there I went to Charleston, and got boat from there. I stayed there for about a month, went from there to Panama Canal, landed down there on May the 11th, and it was an isolated place because we had no communication. There was no roads, no way to get in and out of there except by boat. Of course, we could go by plane, but they weren't very plentiful in that time. But anyway, we were on the Panama Canal for 43 months. And then they brought us back to the States for special training in demolition and other activities. We stayed in the States for 14 months and then went from here to Scotland, England, and then into France, and got in on the push back after the bulge. We were on the, after the bulge was over, we were in the, going back, building pontoon bridges across the river so that our heavy artillery and soldiers could get across. And so we were over there from, we landed at Le Havre, France, New Year's Day, 1945, and then we stayed there and we ended up in Austria. After the war was over, that's where we ended up.
So you were actually in the Army before Pearl Harbor then?
Oh, yes, yes.
So, just out of curiosity, how did you hear about Pearl Harbor down in Panama? I mean, newspaper or the radio, I would imagine.
Well, we had radio at the time. We were, it just so happened that I was from the field. We had our camp at Fort Clayton. That was our garrison post. But we would go out into the interior and do work as construction engineers. We were building an airport at Rio Hatta, which was about 85 miles north of Panama, of the canal. And one weekend we came in for a weekend's time at the post, and while we were there, we were enjoying our relaxation, and on Sunday afternoon, just before we were to ship back out or go back out in the interior Monday, the radio blared out that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and so we knew that we were in then for the duration.
Well, Maurice, let me ask you, since we've got your wives here today, we don't certainly want to get them, but we do want to get them involved. How long had you all, now you understand you all were married when you were in the Army. How long had you been married at that time?
3 months.
3 months?
Yeah. Wasn't it? Or?
No, we were married 9 months. We married in March.
When I got a call, though, we'd been married 3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
But he got deferred in order to, he was a farming with my daddy, and they deferred the boys to get their crops in for that year. So he actually didn't have to go until December.
So they did allow you to go ahead and continue. Well, I guess they were going to need those supplies too then.
Yeah.
All right, now, and as I understand that you and your wife didn't meet until after you got back, right?
I knew her from
Forever.
nobody.
So anything that you
still
talk
don't know
about
me.
that you did over there, you've got amnesty for
She
that,
doesn't know
right?
anything about it, and I haven't told her.
Okay, well, I'll leave that to your discretion as we continue this afternoon.
Well, we met in church,
Did you? Okay.
and I seen her coming down out of the choir, and I gave her a pretty good once over, and I said, "That's for me."
Well,
So she went back and sat down, behind me with 3 or 4 other girls, and they were sitting back there. And of course, I broke my neck, keep looking back, and she was looking too. So,
Did you notice he was watching you when you
Yeah, I
came down?
guess I did. But I was raised on the south side of Ballard County, and he was raised in McCracken. And when the government bought the land to build the TNT plant, the powder plant in '42, his family had to move, and they moved over to Ballard County. So therefore we met in '42.
Okay. So then you got married.
In '43,
Okay.
yeah, 6 months from We met on the 10th, we married on the 10th, his birthday's the 10th, his grandmother's birthday was the 10th, so when the 10th comes around, we wonder what's going to happen.
And I come to see you once on the 10th.
Yeah, he walked 7 miles to see me one time.
Really?
On the 10th.
Surprised it wasn't 10 miles. Try to keep everything, take the roundabout way, so you keep everything in 10.
But it was the 10th day, though.
Oh, okay. Well, you gotta. That's probably the easiest way to remember. All right. Well, now when you went off to training, then you'd been married. Did you have any contact with her, personal contact, while you're doing your training stateside here?
I went with him.
Well,
went with him.
After a while you did.
Well,
It was-
after just a month.
Yeah, a month,
He
yeah.
went in December, and in January I went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and stayed with him and from December till May, because he had pneumonia a couple of times and would get set back, so he was there longer than the regular, 8 weeks that they trained?
13.
13 weeks. So he was set back, and I stayed with him down there.
Okay. Did they have billets for you
No,
on the post, or?
we had a one-room apartment in a house with another lady and shared a kitchen. This old lady turned her home into rooms for soldiers' wives, and we shared a kitchen. We had one room and shared a kitchen. And when I went, you want me to tell you the tale about me going down there?
Yeah. Go
You
ahead.
got time? I was 16 years old, and my daddy took me to Wycliffe and put me on a train. Never had been away from my mother and daddy a night in my life. So I went to Atlanta, Georgia, had a 6-hour wait there for our next train, went to Birmingham, Birmingham or Atlanta one, I can't remember which, but I had to change depots. But I was so shy that I wouldn't ask anybody where the other depot was. Here goes a bunch of people with a suit carrying their suitcases, so I just followed them with mine. And I happened to get over there. And I got down there, and he was in the hospital with pneumonia. Well, they called up to the guest house and said, there's a corporal down here to see Gene Gibson. I went down, and they couldn't come up to our rooms, so we had to go to the recreation hall. So they walked down the hall, and I never said a word. After a while, I looked up at him. I said, sir, you must have the wrong woman. He said, no, I came after you. Marcia's in the hospital. So he took me to the hospital, and then the next day he took me downtown to get this room there. And the first night that Marsh stayed all night with us, he was on KP the next morning. We didn't wake up. He's supposed to be there at 4 o'clock, and we woke up at 7. So during the war, you couldn't buy clocks, but his mother finally sent us an old alarm clock that didn't have any face on the front of it, and we would set it in a dishpan to make it jingle real loud to wake us up.
Necessity being the mother of invention,
That's
man.
right.
You just had to find out a way to do that.
And then this other girl that was in his friend's wife was there, and when our husbands couldn't come home, we would sleep together because we was afraid to sleep by ourselves there. Just kids.
Just kids. Oh, those were the days. Well, FM, since you weren't married, did you have a steady girlfriend or anything, or were you so wild that you was just hanging with the boys?
I just hung out with the boys, and I was hanging out with the wrong ones.
Uh-oh. So did you get any kind of mischief while you were in basic training? I mean, you admitted that that's the reason that you went in is because you
No,
were...
I shaped up pretty quick after I got in there because they pretty well threatened me with all these brass and silver bars on their shoulders and so forth. I was pretty much of a obedient kind of a young man.
So actually going into the military didn't accomplish what your
It
mom
had
hoped it would
It
do.
had a tremendous effect. Of course, it taught me some bad things, but it straightened me out on a lot of crooks and turns. And I can't say enough in appreciation for what good it did for me. Of course, the Army didn't teach me this, but the people that were in there with me, they taught me some of the things about, well, I experimented with a little gambling and just a little drinking, but not very much. I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and I was raised a Christian. I'd gotten to be a prodigal son in my teenage years, but then when I was in the Army, going through and experiencing all that they had done, and I came to the point that I felt like I needed to do something about my life. And so I started back going to church again, and I was in Fort Pierce, Florida, and when I was there, a friend of mine said, I have a little church out on the west side of town. I'd like for you to go with me. So we went. And it was of such a nature and such a spiritual warmth that it warmed my old heart up, and I got back right with the Lord. And then after that, I surrendered when I was in the Army. I surrendered to the ministry too. So I went in a kind of a prodigal and came out a preacher, if you want to call it that way.
That's kind of unique, because a lot of fellas, go into the Army and we have a tendency, just being men as we are, that we learn certain habits when we're in the Army, and it's like, well, it's okay because he's in the Army. That's what they normally do. Now, Bess, I want to get to you here now, because you filled a very unique role during World War II. Tell the viewers what you did while World War II was going on.
I was a Rosie the Riveter.
Rosie the Riveter.
I worked at Brooklyn Field Airport in Mobile, Alabama. Went into training right out of high school for a 16 weeks training. And we could choose 3 places. We could go to Hawaii, California, or Alabama. And my 2 roommates and I chose Alabama because that was closest to home. We had never been away from home much before. So we stayed there and for, I don't know just how long it was, but we repaired airplanes that were shot up during the battle. They'd bring them into Brooklyn Field and we would repair them, rivet them.
For our younger visitors, our younger viewers, I don't know if they ever heard the term Rosie the Riveter before. I mean, I certainly did with my father being in World War II, but there were a lot of females that filled a lot of men's positions. And at that time, I think that riveting was probably predominantly done by the male species, so to speak. And how was it hard? Obviously, it was hard work.
It was hard work, but the hardest thing with me was when we would be repairing these bombers. Most of them would be 24s. And usually they were always cleaned up before we got there, but occasionally we'd get in with blood splatters all over it and everything, and that was real hard. But I'd always think when I was working on them, well, I wonder whatever happened to the crew that was flying this plane when it was shot down. And that was worse than the work.
That would be kind of tough, not knowing what happened to those people, knowing if they lived or died, or but you felt like you knew that you were doing your part.
Oh yes.
To support to support the country in the war effort.
Yes.
And did you have, it's like I say, you got amnesty because you didn't know him. Did you have a beau back then? Did you have a fellow that you saw?
A few.
Did you?
A few.
Did they have like dances and stuff that y'all go to?
Nothing real serious.
No, okay.
Nothing serious.
You just did your factory job and maybe
Right.
went out and did a little dancing every now and then maybe?
Oh yeah.
Had some good music back there, and then they're a big band era.
Yeah. Thing that happened was I had not at this time, but in later life, I had 100 hours at Arthur Murray studio.
Really?
Oh, I love to dance. And he was brought up that, boy, you don't put a praying knee and a dancing foot on the same leg. So before we were married, of course the word got around that I liked to dance. And his family just couldn't quite see that. Her son, a preacher, marrying a dancer.
A honky-tonk girl.
Oh my goodness.
Which a lot of things were told that wasn't true. I never was a honky-tonk girl. But anyway, a lot of those things went around. But I knew, and I didn't blame them. I could understand, because they could not have that. What kind of a preacher would he be with a wife that danced? So, but anyway, I won them over. But that was the biggest decision of my life, I think, after I became a Christian, was the fact of, do I take him or do I take dancing? I chose him.
And how long have y'all been married now?
56 years.
56.
I can appreciate, because she has honored me in my ministry with not pursuing that course of action. And I know that I know that her heart, that she has a body for it. I don't know why she doesn't have good rhythm, but we take exercises of the morning.
Okay.
Ever since I've had heart surgery back 3 years ago, I've had to take exercise. And every morning we do our exercises, and she gets out of rhythm. And I just never could understand how she could have
If
been
they
such
put
a
it to
fabulous
music, I can make
dancer.
it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole key to keeping rhythm is you got to have some music in the background. Well, that's one of the perfect examples of showing, as you all know, is that marriage, if it's going to work, because now how long have y'all been married?
63.
63 years. It's a give and take thing.
Yeah.
It can't be all one or the other. There's got to be compromises, and you got to work things out. And that's the key. You can't get frustrated and say, well, the heck with this. I'm just going to throw in the towel and give it up. And
But our generation didn't look at it that way. Because
That's right.
the last thing my daddy told me before we got married, you remember this is forever. See, that's the way our generation looked
Yeah.
at it.
She always told me, she said, if you leave, I'm going with you. So, that just done away with all the arguments and everything.
well, that's why you're still with her and you're still here today, right? What's
There's one thing that I can say, and I know this is not a very good place or time to say it, and it's kind of morbid, but anyway, anymore we have headstones put up for our graves even before we die anymore. And I've told her, I said, I promise you, I want to put on your epitaph. I want your epitaph to read, a faithful companion. That's what she.
That's probably that's a very wonderful thing to be able to say about your spouse of so many years, because a lot of people that get to a certain point, it doesn't become love anymore. It becomes a habit. And that would be a miserable way to go through life. But that's the thing that I have always respected about your generation is the fact that you knew going in that this is for life. And when times got tough, you went through it together and you worked it out. Now, let's talk about how long you were away from your wife, because you were in, you were in Africa and then Italy and Europe. What was the longest time that you were away from her? I mean, how?
Probably about 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about what it was, 2 years.
And their communication, we were talking about that before the program.
Letters only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, one time I was captured for 64 days,
And I didn't hear from him.
and she didn't hear from me, and she didn't know what, she was about to go crazy, and we were in a spearhead, and the Germans couldn't get us back into Germany or France, and because they knew that they saw the handwriting on the wall that we were closing in, the Americans was closing in on them. And so when they did, and took over, then as soon as I got back, I wrote her a letter and told her what had happened,
My goodness, so that must have been
That was bad.
traumatic,
It
yeah.
was bad.
Now, how was the mail service? I mean,
it
since you
was
were,
slow.
It was slow.
how long did it take a letter to get from her to you?
2 weeks normally.
2 weeks normally.
Is that about right?
That's about right.
About the same going both
And I've
ways?
still
Yeah.
got every one he wrote me.
Do you really?
Yes, she has.
My goodness gracious. Do you ever get them out and reminisce?
No, I got to get them out and destroy them before my kids come.
No, you can't. That's history now. I'm sure this younger generation would understand. I
I've
really
got,
believe that.
I also have the letters that Dale wrote me, our son, while
Yes.
he was there.
I know Dale. Dale
I'm
and I
a
are,
pack rat. We're both pack rats.
well, Dale and I are both Vietnam veterans. I've known
Yes.
Dale for,
Yeah.
gosh, probably 20 years now,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
have the
yeah.
Out of
utmost.
service, yeah.
Yeah.
I know have the utmost respect for him. He's a wonderful fellow. I think the world of him. Now, how about your mail? Was it about the same when you were getting the letter? I presume you got letters from your family and friends.
Yeah, we didn't have airmail in those times. They all had to go by boat. But later on, we had V-mail, what they call
Yeah.
victory
Yeah.
mail.
Yeah, we did too.
Well, we did too later.
You'd
But,
write a letter and then they took a picture
yeah,
of it and they
yeah.
only sent you it was for
Just a
to
little
save.
bitty
I've got a
copy of
It was
copy of
about
one
that
at
big a
home.
square. It was so much mail
I should have brought
then,
I got some of it.
and they just took the picture of it. See, all of our mail was censored. And
A lot of it was rubbed out. They wouldn't.
Really?
yeah,
Oh yes, a lot of it.
So even if you were telling her locations or
no, you
experiences, it
didn't do
wasn't
that.
getting bad.
No, they were all sensitive.
When I was getting ready to go overseas, I had a chance to slip off a base, and I did. Passed the guard, slipped off, and I went into town down Spartanburg.
No, honey, you were in
it's in
Virginia then.
Virginia,
Uh-huh.
yeah. What was it? And I slept off and went down there and called her and told her we was leaving out the next day. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't know, but we're going overseas." That's all I know right now.
And during that time and era, everything had to be kept secret because
yes,
Sure.
yeah.
you didn't know where the
Yeah. No, I had no idea where we were going.
Well, he also mailed me a card from down there in Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah.
And it had a stamp on it. See, our mail during the war was free. We didn't have to put any postage on it. And he's mailed me a card. It had a stamp on it, and I thought, well, what in the world? What does this mean? And I read it, and he said, we're going to ship out a certain time.
He reminds me of the event of my life. I was at Camp Pickett, Virginia, fixing to ship out to go overseas, and I want to go home and see Mama.
And you went?
I went AWL.
Uh-oh.
I got 2 days bad time out of that because they had turned in all my equipment and bed clothing and everything, and they had me out for desertion.
Yeah.
And if they'd have caught me, if the MPs had have caught me, I would have been tried for
Fort
desertion.
Marshall.
Oh, yeah.
Right there,
Sure
yeah.
you would.
But I got back in on the base without them catching me and reported to my captain, and so he broke my rank and gave me extra duty and confinement to base. And he asked me, said, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Well, my sergeant wouldn't give me a 3-day pass, so I wanted to go see Mama, and I went to see her."
Yeah.
I can't. When you got to see Mama, you got to go see Mama. I mean, that's just one of those things. And that's great because, like you talked a while ago, the circumstances under which you joined the military, obviously you have found the Lord, and that's why you made the effort to go see her.
I made a turnaround.
That's fantastic. Well, I'll tell y'all, we're getting, as always happens, this first half hour, we're almost done with it here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break here, and we're going to let the folks at home, run to the refrigerator and get a piece of pizza or a soft drink, or let the dog out or in or whatever they've got to do. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about some other things about during your tour overseas and what it was like coming back and some of the other details about that, maybe comparing them a little bit to what's going on nowadays with the war in Iraq. So if y'all will take a short break, come right back and join us. We've got another half hour to go. Welcome back to Veteran Voice. We're going to continue our program with our World War II vets and their lovely wives. We're going to talk about something that was very prominent in World War II and not so much in Korea, Vietnam, in the war since, and it was the fact that it was a world war, so that there were a lot of supplies that were needed for the troops overseas while they were fighting. So everyone sacrificed, even the people in the United States, as we talked about Rosie the Riveter working in the factory. But there were things like sugar, shoes, coffee, I don't know what all. You had to have a ration card to obtain. Gene, can you tell us what you remember about the rationing back then?
Well, I was so young, but maybe I can remember. I don't know. It's been a long time ago. I know we used to trade stamps with our neighbors. If we had more sugar stamps than we needed, we'd trade to a neighbor maybe for stamps that would buy canned goods. Of course, we was on a farm, and my mother always said if a farmer went hungry, he was just lazy. So we didn't have to buy too many things. But I do remember the one thing, they quit making copper pennies because they needed the copper for the war, and that's when they made those old white-looking, you've probably
Zinc,
seen those.
43.
In 43, those zinc pennies, and just such things as that. And you couldn't go to the store and buy bedclothes, sheets and things like that. And you could buy very few clothes because they needed the cotton and the wools and all for the soldiers. So it was pretty rough.
So there were sacrifices being made by
And
on the home front too. Bess, do you remember anything specifically about the rationing that stands out in your mind?
I think I believe it was by the pound that the sugar was rationed. One stamp would get you 5 pounds, was it, or something. And where I was working, I didn't do a lot of cooking, and so I sent my stamps back to my family. Now, we could get shoes. We had to buy the support shoes, steel toes and heels and so forth. And we could get them because we worked there at the airport and for safety reasons. But gasoline, didn't have a car, so we traded that out, or didn't trade it out. We gave it to our friends that did drive.
So
work.
everybody at home worked together. If you had an
help each
abundance
other.
of stuff, then you could mix and match. We used to do that with sea rations in Vietnam, because if you got them ham and lime and beans for breakfast, it was going to be a bad day. I mean, so but we found that during the monsoon, if you could take a bunch of sea rats and open them up and find out what was in the cans and a little salt and pepper ketchup, you could actually make a decent meal out of it. So the old working back and forth. Now you were talking about the kerosene and gasoline being rationed, and Maurice, you had a story that you were relaying to me at one time about running low on gasoline or not having any gasoline, and that you overcame and improvised. You want to share that with us?
This buddy of mine, his daddy had a 37 International pickup truck, and we wanted to go out one Saturday night, and he said, well, we don't have any gas. But he had plenty of kerosene, because the tractor, you'd start it on gas, switch it over on kerosene, drive it all day, And I said, well, why wouldn't that truck run on kerosene? He said, well, I never did try it. I said, well, let's give that a try. So we started and let it warm up a little bit. Only had about a half a gallon, and directly it was about to run out, and we just poured 5 gallons of kerosene in the tank. And I said, well, let's go to the movies. So we went to La Center to the movies. I said, well, now we can't kill this truck, because we do. I said, we ain't got no gas to warm it up to start it. So we just let it sit there and run, see, all during the movies. And it worked perfect, and we used it from then on. And Lord, we just went all over the country, and people couldn't understand how we could get the gas to do all the running around, and that's all we were doing, playing and running around,
By the way, that same boy in Marsh came to get me one night, and Daddy never would let me leave home with 2 boys. They had to go with get somebody else. So that's when he proposed.
Really?
He said, we'll just get married.
I'd like to share a story that makes me feel bad. While I was in the Army, of course, England had rationing too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we were in England Christmas of 1944. And I had been going to a church over there, and I've had some fellowship for the family that they invited me home with them for Christmas to spend the Christmas holidays, spend the night with them. And the next morning I got up and they fixed breakfast, and they fixed me 2 eggs, and each of them just had 1. And it didn't dawn on me at that time, but I just got thinking after that. Now those people could only get about 6 eggs a year. And here they fixed me 2, where I could get all the eggs I wanted on the post and get them cooked. And I felt so bad about that. I never did get a chance to apologize to them, but they suffered with rationing too. More severe than we did in America.
A lot worse.
Oh yeah, England was after the bombings that they took, but they were, I think, probably showing their appreciation to you for the fact that
they saved up a whole year eggs rationing just to have for Christmas.
Now, when y'all got eggs in World War II, did you get like real eggs from a chicken,
No,
or was
we
it
got
powder eggs?
dehydrated.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I want when I came back. I wanted a fried egg, man. I want a runny, nasty yolk.
And instead of good beef, we got goat meat.
Yeah.
A
Or
horse.
horse.
Or horse meat.
Yeah, I ate
Yeah,
horse meat.
I remember eating some horse meat.
Yeah. I had a family in Florence, Italy, Firenze, Italy. And I'd slip off and go over and see them as often as I could. And this was one Christmas, I guess it was 44. I went over and saw them, and but I always gave them a little money, you know, for fixing meals and spend the night with them. And the next morning she said, well, that night she said, there's a neighbor down the street here got some eggs and they want to sell. Said, you want eggs for breakfast? And I said, I sure do. I said, here's a couple of dollars, go buy them eggs. So they went and bought them, you know. He said, how many you want? I said, about a half a dozen, be good, you know. So she fried me a half a dozen eggs and had meat, I don't remember what kind, but anyway, and gravy and biscuits, and it was a feast.
I'm getting hungry.
We was talking about rationing though a while ago. I was telling you the story about my father-in-law and I when we got married. We'd go to church, and we lived about 8 or 10 miles from church, and never did have a flat tire. But we'd go to Wycliffe, that was a few miles further, during the week, and one day I fixed 7 flats. Because you couldn't buy tires, see, they were rationed, and he couldn't even get a ration stamp to buy one tire with. I don't know why, but he had such a hard time, and him being a farmer too, but I know that it was impossible to get a tire at that time.
So the people, everybody back here shared in the hardships.
Oh yes, everybody shared.
Now, FM, we were talking about you're a combat engineer. You were originally engineer down in Panama, and then became. Did they give you additional training to what they call a combat engineer for building bridges?
We had to come back to the States. Well, we did some down on the Panama Canal. We built, just as a trial run, we built pontoon bridges across the canal. Mm-hmm. And at that time, they were these steel hull pontoon boats. But after we got over into Germany, we got rubber boats. We got them pumped up. They just pumped them up and build bridges out of them.
Well, we were talking a little while ago about Marie saying, they wanted infantry. And I know that a lot of times the infantry are the fellows who look like they're getting the glory, but those are the ones that are going down at the fastest rate too. But I remember in Vietnam, the combat engineers had it. There were places where you'd go in and lay down basic security, and then they would have to come in and either prepare an area for a landing zone or do something like that. And I knew a lot of engineers who had a lot of really close calls. Did you have any experiences like that?
My company did. As I indicated, my job was more or less with the company headquarters or the office back in the camp. But my people in my company often, many times, were under heavy stress and so forth in trying to prepare and make way for these bridges and all. And instead of being able to fight or fight back, they just had to let somebody else do the fighting, and they just did the work.
Well, since we're talking about, I really never got into finding out how you two met, and when you popped the question, how'd that work? I mean, we talked about the fact that it almost didn't happen because she was a dancer. But,
I never did pop the question. She asked me the other day when did I ever propose to her? I said I didn't.
Really?
I just said, are you going to marry me or not? Well,
He did ask Daddy, though.
she came back from Miami. She was still away from home, and she came back home on a vacation. And it just so happened that I was pastor of her church when she came back home, and we were in a revival, and during this revival is when we met. And of course, after the revival was over, she went back to Miami and continued her work there. And I was in school. I didn't get to go to school before I got out, before I went in the Army. I could have, I guess, but My dad died when I was 13, and I had to stop out in the early spring to help him make a crop on the farm. And I never did get to finish up the exams in the grades. But anyway, I qualified for the 8th grade before I went to the Army. But that's as far as I went. But after I was in the Army and surrendered to the ministry in there, I had a brother-in-law back at home who was a minister. And when I got back home, after my ordination in 1946, well, it was during that time, my brother-in-law said, I think you need some more education. And so he took me to a Baptist academy, a high school, where they took different age, you boarded and stayed there on the campus. And so in January 1946, I enrolled as a freshman in high school. And I went through I got the 16 credits that I needed in 2.5 years. So that's where I started my education. And after that, I went on into college, and after that into some seminary. I never did finish up the seminary. I got a master's degree, but I started working on my doctorate degree, but I never did get to finish it.
But when you met her, then you never really said got on the one knee thing. Are you gonna marry me or not?
After she came back, I was still pastoring in a neighboring church. I guess I was still pastoring her church at the same time. In those days, we had what called half-time churches. You would pastor a church half of the month and another church the other half of the month. And during that time, of course, we got kind of heavy in our dating and so forth. And she pulled a funny on me. She went swimming one Sunday, one afternoon. I don't know if it was Sunday or what, but a bunch of the young people went swimming down to what they call the blue hole in the creek down there, and she couldn't swim. And at the time, we had kind of broken up. But after she came back, during this swimming episode, she almost drowned. And one of the neighbor boys rescued her and pulled her out to the shore.
He's never let him forget it.
And after that was over, and I heard about that, I said, well, I better get to find out about this. So it kind of brought us back together. And after that, we stuck it out pretty heavy. And I never did ask her, really. I never did propose to her. I just said, we're going to get married. When are we going to get married? And she never would give me an answer. So ultimately, I just came to her. I said, well, if you don't marry me on August the 21st, we're going to call it quits.
Wasn't that dirty?
So
Gave you the old ultimatum, huh?
she saw.
Nowadays it seems like it's the other way
She
around,
saw the
doesn't it?
light, didn't she?
I guess she saw the handwriting on the wall.
Well, it's the shoe's on the other foot, because nowadays it's the woman coming in. You don't get it. So,
But the funny
Gosh.
thing was, when I came home from Miami and he was our pastor, I wrote my friends back in Miami that we had a single pastor and that I was going to marry that preacher. And I'd never met him.
my goodness.
And then one time he had to preach 2 sermons. You know the late Mrs. Speakman?
The late Miss.
Yeah, she came up one Sunday. I was about through with my message, and I saw her coming up across the yard. I said, "Oh, gal, you ain't gonna get away with this. I'm just fire up and preach you another sermon."
Did the rest of the congregations?
Well, in those days, they didn't have restaurants. They had to beat the Methodists to the restaurant to eat.
Things
In
they
those
have.
days, you had to go back home and cook your own meal.
Nowadays, that's the thing, is you got to watch that watch to make sure you don't get in it. Otherwise, by the time you get there, the gravy's all cold. You know, it ain't good. Well, we talked about communication, the mail and stuff, and I mentioned to you that, you know, in your all you had was the mail and then the little V-mail, I think you called it.
Email.
Whereas in my area, you could make a phone call home, but it was very, very difficult. There's 12-hour difference and spotty at best because it was by shortwave radio. The troops that we've got over in Iraq and Afghanistan now, have got it so completely different with emails and cell phones and and all the type of communication that they can have with their family, which is good because a lot of these fellows are National Guard and reservists. I wonder sometimes, and I've mentioned this before in the program, that that's kind of a double-bladed sword, because there are times that you get mail and it's like you said, when he got captured, it was not good news, and it almost makes the situation worse. And I would imagine there are some times when you get good news where he's gotten a promotion or a medal or something, and it makes you feel good. And I've always thought of that as a double-bladed sword to, the communication being as close as it is now. What do y'all think about that? Do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing, or a mixed bag?
Anytime you mix the media in with anything, it'll be a controversial deal. You can bet on that, and it can be good, and it can be bad. But for a bunch of men that's out there fighting, trying to survive, and the media in there and getting involved, a lot of times they hinder you. It's not always good for them to be there so much. And back World War II, we didn't have that problem. If you shot someone and you shouldn't have shot them, that was forgot right there on the spot. In fact, I did that. I saw a German and I saw a hand grenade, and I saw him do like this, raised it both hands up. Of course, all he was doing, I guess, probably was surrendering after I figured it out later. But you can't go ask him, what have you got in your hand? Is that a hand grenade you're going to throw at me? It was a can of beans. And what would the news media have done with that?
Oh, they'd crucified you.
Huh? Yeah. I didn't have time, but I had 1 second to make my decision, and I made it, and I've been sorry of it ever since. But that's war.
When you're in a combat situation, you don't have time to analyze and evaluate everything that's going on.
That's exactly right.
FM, do you have any opinion on the communications, if you think it's a good thing or a bad thing right now, or do you even have any opinion on that?
I don't know that I would have an opinion really that would be considered valid.
So it's just one of those things. It's just the differences
just
between
rather
then
not
and
make
now.
any comment on it, because now if I had somebody over there that was communicating with me and so forth, it might be different. But since I have no contact or any reason for it, I just don't
Tell me
know.
about you in the ammunition truck.
Oh no.
What, you have a mix up with an ammunition truck one time?
Oh, she's always trying to bring up these stories. It's not a communication story as far as trying to communicate with somebody else away from where you are. But we were out on a riverbank with our company in convoy, and we pulled off on the side of the riverbank to eat supper. And while we were there, we were lined up to get our chow to eat. And when we did, there was one of these German dive bombers come over, and he made a dive, squealing just like he was going to unload a big bunch of bombs on us. And every one of us started running for cover. Well, the first thing I did was I just dove right under a big truck. I thought, well, that'll give me some protection. And after the episode was all over, and I come out and I looked up there, it was a 5-ton Diamond T truck loaded with dynamite and TNT. So if it had done anything, I wouldn't even have been in a greasy spot.
Sometimes what you think is good cover might not be as good a cover as you thought it was.
That communication was bad.
Oh, yeah. Maurice, have you got any other stories?
Yes, it's about my son Dale. You knew
Yeah.
him. He lost a leg in Vietnam.
Yes, I
Got messed up pretty bad. And the postmaster at Kelville come out to see me one morning, and I was up on my roof, putting a roof on the house. He said, "Come down, I want to talk to you." And I went down, and he had some notes wrote out, which they had told him. Said, "We've got a letter about Dale." Said, he lost both legs and one arm, and they're concerned with his life, very concerned with his life. I said, okay. I went in the house and I started calling. I called every congressman, every senator, the Red Cross, everybody in the world that I thought that had any authority. And I had a girl on the phone from Bell telephone system there in Paducah, and she stayed with me, and I didn't know it. We was on the phone for 8 hours trying to get through to
Hear from him.
hear from Dale. And so finally I told her, I said, well, just call the White House. She said, I've always wanted to do that. So she called the White House, and I talked to Nixon's secretary. And she said Nixon was out in Arizona at a school having
Commencement.
a message out there.
Commencement exercise.
Commencement exercise, okay. And but about an hour later, I got a telegram. And I went and picked the telegram up. And the telegram gave me permission to call one of his aides in Washington. And within 10 minutes, I was talking to my son in the hospital in Vietnam. That's how
It was by a
fast.
Mars satellite.
Yeah,
So that communication worked out well for
that
you.
communication worked out perfect. And I had senators and congressmen all calling me, wanting to know how I got to talk to the president. And he sent me 2 or 3 messages, you know.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to at least find it. And thank God it wasn't as bad. And
No.
Dale's got a great attitude and, and overall
He
perspective.
only lost a leg, and then his all the meat underneath his right leg was all blowed off, and some messed up surgery to his arm and hand and one finger. But he's always had a good attitude about it.
Yeah. Let me go back to you two and the time that you were apart. You said it was about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like being away from each other? I mean,
Well,
you two had not met yet, but you were
90% of my
overseas.
time I was so busy I didn't even have time to think about it. I mean, it was.
Yeah, things on your mind.
And then when I did have time to think about it, why, I was always thinking about all that rationing. They gave us a beer a day and a Coke a day, and if you wasn't there to get it, I mean, you know, that's what we could get. Then we was on the line maybe for a couple of 3 weeks, sometimes a month, 30 days at a time. We'd come back, we'd have all these beers and all these Cokes. Well, there was several guys there that didn't drink. So they'd trade their beer for Cokes. And we'd ice down all this beer, and we'd have enough to last a few days, you know. And so for a few days, well, I didn't have a worry in the world.
Didn't even think about Gene.
Why, no, I didn't have time to think about Gene.
Well, Gene, what was it like for you? I mean,
Well, it was just, I don't know,
Tell him
just,
about staying with my mother and
just
dad.
lonesome and sad. I reckon I stayed with my mother and daddy and his mother and daddy. I'd stay a week or two with one of them and go stay a week or two with the other one, and whatever I needed, they provided for me. And the allotment that he sent home, I kept it every bit until he got home. And that's one way we got a little start in the world, I guess.
She wouldn't even spend her money. If she needed shoes, she'd make my dad go buy them, or make her dad, just wherever she was at, you know. That's,
Smart woman.
yeah.
so that was just one of those things that you had
It's just one of those things that you had to accept. There is some things in this life that you have to accept. Nothing you can do about it.
Some things you can do things about, and some things you just have to accept. It's a serenity prayer, essentially.
Yeah,
And
that's-
sometimes it is hard to tell the difference.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The homecoming, you know, you heard the war was over? How long did it take him to get home?
It was, he came home in the fall of 45, and then he had to go back. They got his records mixed up with another Marsh W. Gibson, and he's in the Army 2 months after he got home from there
I
before
had the
they
points to
discharged.
get out, but they wouldn't let me out because they had sent his record with me. He and I were in the hospital together at the same time, and I was all right. I'd had concussion, but I was all right, and they was going to send me back up to the lines. So we all went out to get on the trucks, and the sergeant, he was calling out all the names, you know, and he hollered out Maurice Gibson. I said, here, and somebody else hollered here, and he said, hollered it one more time, and then he said, come up here. I said, Maurice W. Gibson. I went up there, and this other guy walked right up beside me. And he said, which one of y'all are Maurice W. Gibson? I said, I am. He said, I am. And they got our records in that hospital mixed up. And when they did, why, I don't know how in the world it could happen, but it did.
It's because it's the Army.
Yeah, that's it.
We're getting close to the end of the program. I know that you two have got a song, and you say this song's about 100 years old.
Yeah, or older.
All right, so we're gonna close out with music like we did the last time you were a guest here.
All right.
And first off, FM, I want to thank you and your lovely wife, Bess, both of you. Thanks for coming on the
Thank you.
program. Really enjoyed this. Very
Enjoyed.
educational. Wish you both the best. Thank you too, and we're going to let you close it out with a song.
Like Jack Davis came trotting through the woods, he sang so loud and merry. He sang so loud that he made the woods ring, and he charmed the heart of a lady. He charmed the heart of a lady. Come go with me, my pretty little miss, come go with me, my honey. I swear by the sword that hangs by my side, you never shall want for money. You never shall want for money.
She
Pulled off her high heel shoes, were made of Spanish leather. She put on her low-cut shoes, and they both ran away together. They both ran away together. That time the landlord came inquiring for his baby. They told him she's gone away, she's gone with the Black Jack Davis. She's gone with the Black Jack Davis.
Go
Saddle for me, my big gray steed that rides so fast and steady. I'll ride all day and I'll ride all night, or else I'll find my baby, or else I'll find my baby.